I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast. I'm Anton Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brother,
Anders.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And this month, we're discussing Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which has been put forward as the final entry in the celebrated Mission Impossible series. Now, before we get started, we want to thank you for listening and for your support. Could we please ask you to leave a brief review or star rating? We are an independent podcast, and we rely on you to spread the word. So if you like what you're hearing, please rate, review, like, and share. Thanks so much. And now, on with the show.
And here we go.
Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning stands out as a great legacy sequel in what is shaping up to be yet another crowded summer of sequels, reboots, and Disney live-action remakes. Now, given that a legacy sequel typically refers to a sequel that appears after a gap of many years or even decades, think Beetlejuice or Gladiator 2 from last year, why would I apply the term to Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which in most respects could simply be thought of as Mission Impossible 8, the eighth entry in a sequential series of spy action movies? While The Final Reckoning does operate as a traditional sequential entry in the series, it is also a film concerned with legacy. The legacy of the character Ethan Hunt's choices within the world of the films, as well as the legacy of the series itself that began in 1996 with Mission Impossible, directed by Brian De Palma. The Final Reckoning sees itself as the culmination of the series, and in the world of the film, the evil AI entity operates based on the gathered information it has acquired through infiltrating the internet and government security systems, but also what it knows about previous events and characters in this film world. As Ving Rhames Luther says in this film, which was repeated in the trailers, our lives are the sum of our choices. And you could say the same about a movie franchise.
Our lives are the sum of our choices. If this was your calling, your destiny, I have no regrets. Neither should you.
The tone might be more serious than previous entries, and there is a distinct gravitas and sense of foreboding that pervades both this film and Part 1, Dead Reckoning, but is still a fun, exciting action movie that delivers everything I want from a summer blockbuster. But I don't know what you think of, Anders. What was your general impression of the film? Do you agree that in some ways it operates more self-consciously than previous entries? Should we consider it a legacy sequel?
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
My general impression of the film is that I liked it quite a bit. I think I liked it better than Part 1 for a number of reasons. I agree with you that it's definitely very self-conscious. It's a film that is aware of its role, as you say, as a sort of culmination. I think the flip side of that might be that it's a little more self-serious than some of the earlier entries.
Yeah.
There's a lightness to some of the earlier ones, particularly like Ghost Protocol, despite the fact that it has like a whole bombing of the Kremlin and stuff. But but on the other hand, it really, there's fewer big action scenes in it, but they really, I think, deliver. So in that way, there's some great stuff about it. But I'm trying to sort of figure out, I see what you mean by calling it a legacy sequel, in the sense that, like, it's concerned with legacy in the way that a lot of these belated sequels are, right? They're playing off the relationship they have to the original, the callbacks, the references. And this film is like...
And the audience has knowledge of those.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's a few things in this film that really... There are moments where it suffers maybe a little bit from what some people complained about in some of the Star Wars films, shrinking universe syndrome, right? When certain characters pop up, but it's also, I appreciate what they're trying to do with some of them, and we can get into some of those details later. But so it's a legacy in that sense, right? It not only is concerned with the concept of legacy, but the callbacks and recognition that audiences will get from those things. But maybe it's a legacy sequel, but it's not like doing like many of these legacy sequels, the requel thing. It's not like Yeah, I don't know.
You're right in that it's not trying to give extra life to the series in
Right.
that sense, or to reboot it, to revive it. It's not operating in that sense, where a lot of the legacy sequels are also kind of the requel reboot. I also agree with you about it does have, and I thought with Part 1 Dead Reckoning 2, like a more serious tone, and self-serious, in that, like, you know, going back to Mission Impossible 2, most Mission Impossibles have been about, like, the end of the world, potentially, through some sort of nuclear event, or even if it's not the end of the world, it's, like, significant amount, cataclysmic levels of death.
Right.
You know, nuclear bombs are going to destroy this whole country. But this is the one that, like, treats that, like, Ghost Protocol almost, like, laughs at the end about, no one in this city realized they almost
died of nuclear, or Sydney, even in Mission Impossible 2, with, like, the chemical weapons and stuff,
Whereas this one, like, it wants you to be very concerned that this actually could be the end. And I don't know if this relates to the whole sort of AI theme, in that my read on the film and sort of having the AI entity is that that's not simply the movie sort of cherry picking a hot button topic. It's actually very concerned about the potential of, like, what this could mean, and then it's also interested in sort of the thematic possibilities of what this means in terms of filmmaking too. I don't know what you think about.
No, I think you're right in terms of that self-reflexivity. A couple things. I think one way it differs from some other legacy sequels, such as, say, like Halloween or even Force Awakens or Jurassic World, is that it doesn't also, like, repeat the beats of the original the way they often do. So
more than the fact that the Mission
exactly.
Impossible movies always kind of have certain formula aspects, but it's not like we're going to redo that scene. Yeah.
Right. But I think that the use of AI is definitely part of that self-reflexivity. And for a series that has so consciously marketed itself through the use of, like, real stunts, real filmmaking, the filmmaking being the sort of main draw for a lot of people.
In the end, when we get sort of in the climax where we get the two streams of action, and one is, you know, Ethan Hunt has to get Gabriel, and the other is, you know, Benji and the team trying to capture the entity and sort of take
the
it
genie in the bottle.
Genie in the bottle. Again, this part in the previous one, a lot of sort of potent mythical references throughout. You know, to elevate the kind of, like, archetypal aspect that's been in there, but it really is a little bit more self-conscious, I find, this time around. But so you got the Benji side of things, which is dealing with a digital problem, like they have to capture the AI entity. But then capturing Gabriel, even though he has to, you know, at the end put the poison pill USB into, you know, the whatever transponder or drive, like Gabriel makes even takes time to say, like, you know, I have these two nice, like, you know, old planes.
They don't have any computers. They have
no. Yeah, they're like, you know, so it's an analog stream of action that's set in contrast to the digital stream of action, and it even the fact that it's like biplanes, like it just has like an old school feel. Like I feel like after the movie you mentioned Indiana Jones, and
definitely
you think about that.
So there's a couple ways in which it's bigger than some of the others, not only in its length and, like, budget and stuff too. Like that, but it takes as its references broader cinema. Like, there's a sense in which this Mission Impossible, for me, it is the one that is, like, the most like a James Bond movie. Almost, right?
Well,
like,
okay, develop that, yeah.
In the sense that, like you said, the stakes are very high. You have the theatrical type villains, you have, like, you know, the Russians, you have all this, like, global, like, stuff, but then it even, like, amps it up even more in some sense. Like, you have the president, you know, Sloan used to be the head of the CIA. Angela Bassett's character is now the president of the United States, so Ethan is reporting directly to the president and, like, kind of disagreeing with the president.
There's a little bit of that Judi Dench relationship.
Yes, absolutely. but it almost kind of sets this time, like, makes it really clear that, like, Ethan sees his, like, duties and loyalties above almost any nation. Like,
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting, unlike Bond, who is, you know, Her Majesty's.
Yeah.
You know, at least as far as all the Bond series so far.
And that thematically is a thing in this movie where it's all about the threat of AI's power with the entity means that all the nations are retreating to more unilateral action. They're not looking to sort of cooperate. Everyone's guard is up. Like the movie really taps into the moment in a way that I thought it was really interesting, that how Dead Reckoning, you know, they would have selected their choice for a movie, you know, a year or two at least before they made that movie. But when it hit in 2023, the year where sort of ChatGPT and stuff blows up, to me, it seemed like the perfect villain at that moment. And then now, the way the entity plays in this version 2 years later, with this sort of global AI arms race, which is shaping up, I think, again, this movie hits really relevant.
But what the movie argues is that the thing that we need to do to defeat AI is actually the opposite of that instinct of, right? We need to cooperate.
Yeah.
We need to, it's like when Ethan and Briggs, Shea Wiggum's character, right, who's revealed to be the son of Jim Phelps, again, shrinking universe, but
John Voight.
Basically, he says, you need to do the opposite. You need to forgive me, right?
Yeah.
And I forgive you. And it's like, we have to do the opposite of what the AI thinks, because the AI can only go based on predictive things. If we can set aside those things and actually, you know, if there's some interesting sort of almost moral things going on with that suggests that the way we beat it is, not through conflict, through trusting, by shut down your nukes before they can be taken over by the AI.
Yeah, which seems to suggest that, it's embrace the humanity of us as humans, and that because that's the distinguisher. The movie, whether it's there in the fact that it wants to place emphasis on physical stunts, the movie seems thematically, whether it's explicit or implicit at times, it's very much that there's a distinction between humanity and what humans do and what can be done by other technological means. Even though this series loves technology, but by having
it's there a bunch of times, even when they have to have the dog sled, right?
Yes.
But it's focused on the human and the human's ability to move beyond a sort of binary thinking and oppositions and things like that too.
So there's that theme. A lot of the entries in the series often have kind of a thematic line that's sort of echoed throughout the movie. And this one, it's said, I think, first by Luther, and then is perhaps echoed again later. But it's we are the sum. Our lives are the sum of our choices. And what I find interesting about that is that if you think about even that phrase, if you think about it in a purely kind of computer approach, sum means it's just I just add up everything you did in your life and I get a total and I'll know what you do next. But then, the way the sort of the forgiveness things works is actually I'm going to go in a different direction than what the sum would suggest.
Each choice that we make is able to rewrite aspects of the past.
Yeah, so it's you're not trapped within an algorithm. It seems to show that humans have that potential. So there's a whole thematic aspect to this movie that resonates with me and I like a lot.
Yeah. And it's expressed in a lot of those side characters who pop back up. William Donlow, who the hapless CIA computer operative who even steals an Oculus from in the first and they poison him and he's always going to the bathroom.
Yeah. And then he's sent by Kittredge. Yeah. Banished
to the ends of the earth, to the Bering Sea, to St. Matthew's Island. But as he says, that choice he redeems it through making a good life and meeting his wife and learning about Inuit culture and all these things, right? And it ended up being a good thing for him in some sense. So there's this idea of redemption in the sense that a later choice can heal mistakes made in the past, which is again goes against algorithmic linear type thinking in that way. I think you have a bit of that in the Briggs character, even the president,
Yep.
right, and the Nick Offerman general,
Yep.
and all those things. So it's repeated a few times. I think it actually works pretty well thematically as a film. So I think despite it being like so long, I see like they put it has a real screenplay.
Yeah, like I've read some comments online that sort of suggest that there's not much narrative, but I would say that there might be some problems with levels of exposition in the sense of like there's times where I'm like people are talking around an issue and you're like it sort of goes on, maybe I didn't need all this, and then there's other times you're like I was a little bit confused. Like I'd say that there are certain entries in the series that are a little bit more slick about how they reveal information, how we know what we need to know. But at the same time, I do feel like the movie, if we think of it as part 1 and part 2, which I think we should, even though they changed the subtitle, from Dead Reckoning Part 2, and we're going to call it The Final Reckoning, which sort of underscores again this whole question everyone has now: is this going to be the last
finality
entry? Yeah. But I think that the movie on many fronts, both in terms of its themes and also in terms of its set pieces, does live up to the promise of like we're going to bring this to like the full climax of the series. Like I came away and like you might be like, this movie's maybe a little bit long. It's almost 3 hours. But at the same time, I didn't come away being like underwhelmed by that was it for the last movie. Like I didn't feel that at all.
They crammed everything, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, earlier I didn't pick up the thread of the other reference. So I said there's a touch of James Bond to it, sure.
Yep.
But I think that you mentioned Indiana Jones. The
Yeah,
ending,
let's do that.
the whole Doomsday Vault is literally, they describe it as like an ark, reference to Noah. It has this kind of biblical resonances.
Which also recalls then.
Yeah.
The Ark of the Covenant.
The Covenant, Raiders
Lost Ark. Yep.
So there's a strong part of that. The fact that they're on the biplanes, him and Gabriel at the end.
Benji's even wearing like one of those adventure hats.
Yeah, Benji gets the Indy hat. And obviously there's a lot of like sort of those biblical resonances running through even the villain's name Gabriel and stuff. Mm-hmm. The other big obviously referent is like Terminator.
Yes.
Because the entity is essentially Skynet, but a real Skynet, like a Skynet like that we could almost imagine in our own world right now, right?
So if the Terminator had to thematically deal with that issue by imagining a future and then having that future like travel back in time to deal with us, now we're at the point in time where that we've arrived at that possible future, and it's just a present reality.
Right, we've caught up with it. Yeah. Definitely strong Terminator vibes with the entity and Skynet kind of thing. And then there's a lot of good references to submarine movies like Hunt for October or Crimson Tide and those kind of things, and The Abyss, right? Yeah. Specifically The Abyss, because Ethan has to put on this special suit to go down underneath the ice cap to the sunken Sevastopol submarine.
So you're really making me now think. I like your comment where you're like, this movie really leans into those references to other action films. So what's interesting is that, if we look at the first 3 Mission Impossible movies, my understanding and sort of reading some of the production pieces from those times was that originally Mission Impossible was imagined as we will pick a different sort of action auteur, and each installment will be tonally slightly different and lean into whatever that director's thing is. And you see that very much where it's like, Mission Impossible 1 is a Brian De Palma thriller.
Like it's full-on blowout.
And we're going to like replay scenes and we see it differently, how that scene worked out. And then Mission Impossible 2, which I rewatched recently, you're like, it's such a John Woo movie. So we have to have doves. We're going to have Ethan Hunt with like 2 guns, diving, shooting. And then even the way that, J.J. Abrams for number 3 was not a movie auteur at the time, but a TV auteur.
Alias.
And the movie actually has a stronger like TV mentality. And not only by bringing in sort of the domestic into it, which has kind of a TV show play of being like, this is my like wife life, and then I have my spy life, that sort of humor. But even in sort of Abrams brought in his shaky cam, which upon rewatching again recently, is very different visually. Okay, so we have those 3 films.
And Abrams And Abrams was known at that time. He produced that TV show Alias.
Yes.
And,
yes.
and then you have Kerry Russell in there, and then you have it also sort of references things like 24 at the time.
Yep.
Right, like sort of the
That
brutality
TV
of like the torture
thriller
scenes and stuff. Yeah.
spy. You're right. I think I would say that whole Philip Seymour Hoffman opening with a torture it's so 2006.
Very Jack Bauer.
Yeah.
We've put an explosive charge in your head. Does that sound familiar? The rabbit's foot, where is it?
I gave it to you.
Ethan. Where's the rabbit's foot?
What are you saying? That wasn't it? What I gave you?
I'm gonna count to 10. You're gonna tell me where the rabbit's foot is, or she dies.
Jules, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. Do you understand?
1.
You listen to me. I got exactly what you asked for. Did you want something else? So if there was a misunderstanding, I will fix it. I can get it. Whatever you want.
2.
Listen. Talk to me. We can talk. Like gentlemen.
3.
And also just the whole idea of like around that time we're gonna like it being still a novel thing to show you a moment late in the movie, and then we're gonna jump back and explain how that works, which is now kind of like passe and like conventional. Okay, but so those three are very much shaped by the director, and then with Brad Bird / Christopher McQuarrie, like it starts to change, but by this film, what I find really interesting is like it's so self-conscious about it's like we're doing James Cameron scene now.
Mm-hmm.
Like even visually, the way we look at that inside the submarine, like this looks like a James Cameron setting. The water is filling up. It's like the industrial, like it just looks like Cameron, and that clearly is the reference point. And then the way you get the action sequences at the end, it's like it's more Spielbergian. And then
those are the two big director references, I think.
But then I think you've even mentioned the fact that you're like, you're starting like I don't think if you've seen Hunt for Red October or something, it's hard not to think about that with the Sevastopol and things like that.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting that the film went away from this like we'll have the action auteur sort of determine it. It really then became the Tom Cruise auteur series, where where Tom Cruise as producer and actor will shape the series, and then with his with Christopher McQuarrie, he really hits a stride where it's like he is like a great journeyman director who doesn't draw attention to himself. I think he's super capable. He can film really well. He can capture action really well. But then the emphasis isn't on the film's style, except in those referential points where you start to see stuff happen. Like you wouldn't be like, this has a Mission Impossible style, apart from stunts.
No, it's not the Mission Impossible style, because it was established to be variable in the first 3 films, depending on the director. McQuarrie himself was never like didn't have to, and so he can pick and grab, right? Like I would go so far as to say like Fallout is the Nolan entry.
Yes, because the middle sequence also where it's like the heist / like a guy in captivity really reminds me a lot of The Dark Knight and when they sort of capture Joker and the way the action plays out.
But McQuarrie is able to then put the focus not on his own directorial authorship, but rather on Cruise and the stunts and the all that stuff instead.
But I would give him a lot of credit. I rewatched all of the Mission Impossible movies, going back to sort of winter to now. In McQuarrie, like he always picks the right shot to show the action. I don't know if you could say he has a distinct style, but you're like that. There's rarely like sometimes I'll watch a movie and you'll be like, that's a really cool like action that I just saw on screen, but I don't know why you chose that camera angle or whatever
Yeah.
to show it, and it doesn't accent it to the best. Whereas I feel like the Mission Impossible movies really, they've thought through, partly because they're built around these action set pieces, but they really think well of like, okay, if we're gonna have him in a biplane and he's hanging onto the wing, like how are we gonna shoot this in a way that it feels real, that we're scared for him, but two, it's visually comprehensible. Like they don't hide stuff, but they you obviously hide what you need to hide, but it always feels like I can see the action spatially. It's clear.
In that sense, it reminds me, maybe like even of some like Hong Kong action and stuff like that. The stunt work and the idea Cruise is almost becoming a sort of Jackie Chan character, or maybe say Buster Keaton.
Yes. Well, because I was showing parts of The General to my kids, my boys, and what I found interesting rewatching it again, I was like struck by, like this is a movie that's like, we always think of Buster Keaton as one of the sort of original sort of comedic slapstick actors, and he's also known the comparison to Jackie Chan because of his sort of physical prowess, his ability to jump around. But I'm watching this movie, and it's like kind of, it's like kind of a serious sort of just Civil War story. And the way he's like jumping around this train, operating it, there's like big like action, like battle scenes going on behind him. And you're like, there's actually a lot of reference points to the way that Ethan Hunt like runs around and stuff.
Yeah.
Because you enjoy his like physical prowess, his ability to sort of manipulate the machinery or whatever's around him. And there seems to be it delights in what he can do physically while at the same time wanting you to be aware of the potential dangers of what's around. It's not pure comedy, because in pure comedy, like sometimes people have referenced like say Looney Tunes for Mission Impossible. But the thing is in Looney Tunes, if some guy gets shot or blown up, like that's part of the gag and we want to see that.
Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no further delays, so I shall attempt to entertain you in my own inimitable fashion.
Whereas the Buster Keaton reference I find better because there's the danger. Like think about the great scene where Buster Keaton has the building fall down on him.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
If he isn't lined up with that window,
Perfectly.
he's gonna get flattened by that. So the danger element is needed for us to have both the thrill plus the laugh. And I feel like that's sometimes what is going on with Mission Impossible movies.
And it's not just the danger to the character, but to the actors potentially too.
Yes,
And that's what Jackie Chan has too, right? Where it's like he likes to show the outtakes so that you know how many bones he's broken and all that stuff, right? But there, so it, and maybe that also is referenced in Indiana Jones a little bit, right? That Indy gets beat up all the time.
Oh yeah, I was rewatching Temple of Doom, and I was like, man, Indy's never in control of his scene. He's just always getting pummeled, and he kind of, as he says, like, I make it up as I go. Like,
and Ethan kind of is too.
Yep.
Right? It's like, just kind of like, trust that it'll all come together, and you'll
yeah, they have the plan, but it's always sort of like, yeah, and you kind of just got to go with it.
Yeah.
Like,
and I think that's where, I've had people tell me that they like just don't really care about like Ethan Hunt and like Benji and Luther and everybody's characters. I'm like, come on, like sure it's a bit perfunctory, but the idea that it's like that, I should care about Marvel characters, comic book characters, but not care about them. I'm like, I found like Luther's sacrifice way more like moving than most movie characters. Maybe it's just the accrual of time, right? That we've been watching him since 1996, and so we can infer this close brotherly friendship.
Yeah. Okay, one more comment on the comedy before let's swing to some talk about the characters. I also think for a movie that I just have described as being a little bit more somber in tone than previous ones, it's like at the same time I don't want people to think that like this is still a fun movie. And there are times where it leans into the humor, and I think also again with Christopher McQuarrie, him and Tom Cruise developed sort of a great rhythm of like where they have these moments of humor in the midst of kind of the action. And I think and even with Brad Bird, there's a great moment in Ghost Protocol, where it's sort of like, well, you know, and Ethan's just going to crawl up the side of the building. And sort of the look on like Tom Cruise's face, like, yeah, like I just have to do that? And you're like, yeah. And they do that again within number 7, or Dead Reckoning Part 1, where it's like, and you'll just ride the bike off the cliff. You know, like, like it's just sort of this assumption he's going to do something super dangerous. But a great little moment at the start of this one was right before it cuts to the Mission Impossible sort of credit sequence with the classic music. You know, we've just had this sort of like extremely violent off-screen scene where it's like, you know, Ethan's beating these guys up with like meat cleavers and all this sort of stuff. Again, it's played for humor, but you know, a dark humor because it's off screen and we're just seeing the reaction.
We see her reaction.
Yeah, Grace's reaction. And she's like, oh. And then he like runs in. He's like, we gotta go. He goes off screen and then he comes back again onto screen. He's like, no, we really gotta go. Like, it's just a moment where you're like, there's a great like little sort of comedic moment there that you're like, if this movie was only interested in sort of like the serious, it wouldn't have. So clearly that's a whole dimension there.
And it's something that I think that Cruise has actually leaned into a little more. Because, I mean, there were
he's
times
gotten better at it as it's going on.
Cruise, when he was... Like, I kind of loved the era of, like, the original Mission Impossible to, say, like, Spielberg's War of the Worlds. I think Cruise had an amazing run of movies. Like, you start thinking of what he made in there, right? But he is a little bit, like... in like Minority Report or, you know, Eyes Wide Shut and stuff. Like, he got into this really like kind of serious stuff. But with Maverick and now these Mission Impossibles, there's a little more a lighter tone. Ability for him to like kind of poke fun of himself a little bit that he would never have done in the past. I think
I agree.
He had much more control. Yeah.
I think after sort of having to sort of deal with some, remember, like, you know, it was like 2005,
right before the last Mission Impossible.
In round
the third one, sorry.
In round Batman Begins and stuff, like all sort of the negative PR he was getting from sort of everyone being like he's sort of going crazy, but like he sort of clearly had to sort of rebuild how his public facing like brand was, and I do think there's an aspect of him, even though he's like, I'll be super serious about delivering you high quality movie entertainment, but he definitely sort of makes sure to also show a lighter touch at times.
It's something, I think over the last decade and a bit that he's really, you know, I think something like Edge of Tomorrow. Right? He allows himself to kind of be a little bit like the kind of butt of jokes in a way that he wouldn't have in the past. No, and he wears it well, and it endears him a little more to people because, you know, the connotations of like the Scientology and like sort of like perfectionism that he has in other aspects of his life.
There's a charm that's developed with the sort of the rapport with the audience at this stage with the series, which I just kind of love. The fact that on screen in, you know, in this number 8 where we're getting him to do something risky, and the whole audience kind of like has a bit of a chuckle, and they're like, oh man, they're gonna go make him do that, you know. And so maybe this is a good time to sort of get into some of like those action sequences, because I thought the submarine sequence,
it's great,
where he has to go down to the Sevastopol, was great. It was like, it's more intense. I'm trying to describe what the intensity is. There's a claustrophobic aspect, but I think it's also his isolation, and there's no point where he's on his like, you know, there's long sequences that are completely silent, like nearly devoid of dialogue. And he's not talking to his team who are coaching him through what he has to do. It's just he is alone. And so again, we mentioned in this sequence, in this film, bringing in the archetypal aspects. Like, this is the descent into the underworld, right? This is the belly of the beast. He has to literally go down there and retrieve and bring up the boon, you know, to the upper world. And so there's an archetypal aspect, and it really leans into this sort of descent to the underworld. But when you're watching it, like, the whole audience was sort of like, everyone got quiet, you know. Like, usually during the action scenes, there's a bit like we saw it, like, you know, opening weekend, and the audience was really into it. People are laughing at the jokes, people are really into it, and that sequence, everything got really sort of quiet and intense in there. A borderline a bit intense for the kids. Oh yeah, like I took so they're 8 and they saw it and they're seeing it on the IMAX, and like at that stage, like my one kid was just like, I just want to go home. Like this is
That's
too
too
much.
intense,
Like, it's
yeah.
just too dark. And it was really leaning into like musically. It has sort of this like Hans Zimmer style, like, you know, with Christopher Nolan just like sort of throbbing beneath. Like, you know, the sort of the music is gone. But then it has a very strong like vibes of Cameron, of just like you just sort of show the action.
And then it constantly introduces new twists, right? So it's like suddenly he's like, you know, the submarine is moving and torpedoes are falling, and he's, it's like just keeps upping the ante.
Yeah, it's gonna roll. It's gonna go off the cliff. I mean, there's the whole question. I imagine there will be some people in the audience who will be like, when Cruz Hunt has to strip down basically, and he's just like, I'm gonna have to ascend through Arctic water, you know, with just my underwear and like my breath, like, you know, I know people
strains
like,
credulity, sure.
Yes, but it's also like, you know, they're really trying to push it. The way I read that is partly that it's like, we've seen this guy hang on the side of the largest building in the world. We've seen him hold on to an aircraft taking off. How do we make it so we think that maybe, just maybe, Ethan Hunt's not actually going to make it this time?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that stripping down, like, is partly they're just trying to be like this, like, and then he literally, you know, he does have to die.
Yeah, it literally is like the descent to the underworld, death and rebirth, right?
Yeah.
That Grace saves him.
Yeah. No, like, I mean, like, again,
it's a bit heavy-handed.
It's leaning hard into like that dimension of the movie for sure.
Yeah. So if that's the kind of thing that you can't stand, like, might not be for you, but I eat that stuff up because it does still have a little bit of a twinkle in its eye as it does all.
Well, and at this stage, if you're like, how did Ethan Hunt survive that? I don't believe that. You're like, wrong movie series.
Exactly.
What do you think about? Let's talk just about the action of the end sequence. So they have to get to the Doomsday Vault. The biplanes, but also what else is going on. Any comments about that?
I think it's interesting because the biplane sequence sets up a one-on-one between Ethan and Gabriel, whereas the other action is very much a team thing, right?
Yeah.
Because Benji's injured and he has to coach everybody through.
Yeah, so it's like our closest to the duel in like Mission Impossible 2, where it's like we'll be on the motorbikes and we're like the knights facing off.
Yep.
Jousting. Here now we're, you know, having our plane-on-plane fight up in the sky.
Yeah, and the action of that plane sequence is fantastic, especially on the IMAX because there's so much detail. So even when the planes aren't like super big in the frame, everything's super clear and you can see them moving around, and I love it.
I really appreciate this movie also for its IMAX cinematography. There are times because we were sitting fairly close to the screen, and I don't often do that with IMAX, and now I'm starting to think I maybe should do it more, because what I liked by being fairly close was I'm looking around, and there's just so much detail to take in everywhere.
A lot of films advertise themselves as shooting on IMAX, but that you still have to use the technology in a way that justifies its use in a sense, or like why are you choosing this? Because you want that sense of scale.
Yeah.
Because you want that high resolution detail that you get in IMAX that you can't get in other formats, right? So like the worst thing would be someone shooting IMAX, but then they still shoot it like a conventional 35 or like standard HD, right? And it's a lot of close-ups and things like that. So
we've talked a lot about some of the highlights of this movie. Is there anything that you think is a weakness? I have a couple things I
have one. The Entity's cool as a villain, but I don't find Gabriel particularly compelling as the big daddy. Because he really isn't. He is like essentially the patsy of the Entity in some ways. But I kind of wish that there was. I don't find the actor Esai Morales to be particular. It's not that he's a bad actor or anything. Like nothing. Like it's just, to me, he doesn't have the gravitas to face off against Cruz in that way. I think you needed someone. In a way, say that I think in Fallout, Cavill.
Yep. Even the way I think that Sean Harris was great as Lane.
Yeah, no, he's great.
Even though he's sort of like, he doesn't,
he's creepy.
You know, he doesn't have the
creepy.
physical stature, but he has an intensity.
Yeah. And then, of course, Philip Seymour Hoffman. Yeah.
Although rewatching the movie, my shock of that movie is that Philip Seymour Hoffman's not in that movie that much.
No, he's not.
And they replay the key scene twice. he's like, he actually, like, it's like almost like he's such a, it's one of those, like, it's such a good performance that everyone in their head imagines he's throughout the entire movie, but he's not.
Like Silence of the Lambs style.
Yeah. So character wise, so I agree in the sense of Gabriel isn't a great, he's not top tier nemesis for Ethan Hunt, even though it wants him to be, and it tries to suggest that because of this connection in the past, or probably Gabriel's the reason why Ethan Hunt was sort of framed or somewhat implicated in a murder.
They needed to explain that a bit more.
Yeah, so they could have explained that a bit more. That'd be one thing. I think the way that between part 1 and part 2, and that's what I'm calling them, I'm sorry, but part 1 and part 2, the way that they sort of shift, now Gabriel's on the out, and so he's kind of operating he's no longer just the voice, sort of the messenger, right? Gabriel, the angel,
right, of
the new anti-god, the entity. He's no longer that in part 2. And again, you're sort of like, I probably would have feared him more if he still had sort of that connection with the entity,
right?
More.
Because
the entity's the
I don't
source
buy
of the
that
power.
he's going to be able to outwit the entity.
Yeah, and then the fact that there's no mention of Ilsa Faust and sort of her death, and it just doesn't come up, and it just seemed odd because they play that for strong emotional stuff. And here's the weird thing: is that in number 7, so Dead Reckoning Part 1, Gabriel makes a big deal at multiple times in that film that Ethan Hunt uses and expends and sort of tosses aside women. And he's warning Grace, he's like, you're just going to be like another one in the series of this. And then in some weird way that the series like kind of just actually does that. Yeah. And the fact that they all kind of like, there's like similar like looks to all, like, you know, the way that like Haley Atwell kind of looks like, what's her name? You know, the wife character.
Oh,
like,
Michelle Monaghan.
Yeah, like, you know, there's even sort of like visual parallels. So in some sense, like Gabriel's cut like actually runs deeper than just sort of like a villain jibe.
Yeah, I can buy that. It's like the film, the series is not very consistent in terms of like its formulation of Ethan's female companions.
Yes.
Right? Because I think actually, funny enough,
the team.
Or the team. Apart from like Luther and Benji after the third, right? Luther's the only one who's in all the films,
which is why it has weight,
right?
When he has his death,
and Benji is actually because he came in the third one, right? So before the switch to Ghost Protocol and stuff, and so I've actually been impressed with Simon Pegg. He's done a good job as like
he's highly likable, and like I'll say that like
he's not annoying.
My kids, again, they're young, but they love Benji, and they were very worried. It's like, is Benji gonna die now?
Yeah,
like, I actually don't know.
No, but Simon Pegg, like, there's a tendency in sometimes these movies to have this because he comes from the like kind of like Edgar Wright, and, like those like sort of comic book world and like sort of nerdy.
But there's no like snark to.
But no, he's a confident and capable guy in his own right.
Yeah. So if you were gonna think of this as like if we could control the whole series from the outset, I would want, and this could probably merge into our discussion about this series, but you're like, I would want more consistency about the team. I understand the De Palma's thing in the first movie. I think you rightly said when you're ranking them, it's like De Palma wants to blow up everybody. You know, this was pitched as like a nostalgia TV movie in the 90s. You're like, oh, remember that Mission Impossible show we all watched? Now we have the one with Tom Cruise. And he blows up the whole idea of the team.
Yeah.
But then like this, there's times where it's just, I understand it's like casting and producing who you can get. Luther's great. And the series actually needs Luther, and Ving Rhames like is actually really important overall. Is like the steady hand for every series. Like, you know, the fact that Ethan counts on him always, and like, you know, he knows his stuff, like it's just required in the series. Yeah. And I do agree that Benji becomes a nice addition. By 4 he really joins the team, right? Like 3 he's teased, and it's like he worked with the audience, so they'll bring him on. But there's been various points where they hinted that someone was going to join the team, and they play with it a bit, and then they don't do it.
It's
and
like Jeremy Renner.
We get Jeremy Renner in 4, we get him in 5, and by the time you had 5, I was like, oh, Jeremy Renner should just be like sort of the straight man on the team. This works. And then he's gone by 6, and then you get Ilsa Faust, where you're like, yes, she should just be part of the team too. maybe she can always have a, is she working with us? Is she working against us thing? Mm-hmm. But then with 7, again, it was sort of like, I wouldn't have made that choice to get rid of her. And I understand there's like sort of production reasons too. I don't think she could continue on in the series.
Yeah, because she's doing other stuff.
But it becomes a problem where you're just like, when you view the whole series, I mean, if we take the series as originally conceived, where it's like each one's gonna be a little bit different, that's not a problem. But as it evolved, it started to be like, no, they're all sort of linked, and part of the pleasure is seeing people come back. So there's these inconsistencies, which I don't know if they're imperfections, but maybe not even flaws. Like,
yeah,
it's just sort of, you know, I'd
rather they didn't.
Yes,
but it's not like the end of the world.
Yeah.
No, I would agree with that. I think people forget also in the first one, and the thing that like sets it apart and makes it very, very De Palma is like the audacity of having Jim Phelps be the villain is wild. Like I was never, I know, you know, I only saw a few episodes of Mission Impossible growing up as a kid with like Peter Graves and stuff, but like if you were a big fan of that show, it'd be, I'm trying to think of like, it's like if you made what's a popular show? Imagine you made like the X-Files movie and like one of like Mulder or Scully was the villain in the end. You'd be like infuriated.
But then you even give you give Jim his time to explain his reasoning as being like, I was a good agent and they just tossed me aside. And you get those echoes with the John Lark later where it's like,
it's the post-Cold. The thing is, in 96, I put Mission Impossible is not the first one's not only just a, you know, summer blockbuster. It also, to me in my mind, it fits into those like post-Cold War spy thrillers of the 90s, like Ronin, another one of my favorite films, where it's like dealing with like, you had spent 30-40 years in this like constant espionage war between two sides, but when that all falls apart and we're all buddies now, how do we deal with that? And but then of course,
which GoldenEye and Bond even has to draw upon. Yeah.
So GoldenEye, Mission Impossible, Ronin, to me those films all deal with those kind of questions. But then in the 2000s with the War on Terror and then the you know, reemergence of Russia as sort of and China as like rivals to America, you could just bypass that and just re-enter into a pseudo Cold War kind of thing, which even this film does to an extent. I thought it was kind of funny, like how much it like telegraphed which countries have nuclear missiles. So like everyone's gonna be going home and be like, so those are like the 8 countries that have nukes, eh?
I know, it's like we'll get the flag on the missile about the
even especially considering the number of times they throw up Israel having nukes. I'm like, don't think that's actually official. They never have officially admitted that.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's officially out there.
But it's interesting how it sort of re-enters this global crisis of nowadays, right? Like where we have multiple polycrisis, they call it sometimes polycrisis, wars brewing in different spots, right? And
also the sort of like multipolar world.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it's not just one single dominant country, right? And so it reflects that well. And I thought, you know, rewatching them all, it's interesting how each Mission Impossible, so all movies will try to sort of make their reference, or most Hollywood movies will try to make reference points to sort of bid for relevance, often in a very sort of superficial way. And I think that the Mission Impossible movies, in general, I'm not going to say that they're super deep in the reference points, but what's interesting is how well they mirror whatever sort of geopolitical concerns are. As you talk about 1996 and the way that plays spies, number 2 is kind of in its own world. The way that, you know, the villains are in number 4, the way that, you know, it's going to be an extremist who wants to sort of reboot things. And then we're going to get these sort of rogue people who want to bring down systems. There's pretty good nods to what's going on in the world that make the movies always kind of like hit well.
Yeah, they don't feel disconnected from our reality.
Yeah.
Even if they're clearly not our reality.
And in some ways I'd say I probably find these final 2, apart from maybe the first one, some of the most potent in how they connect to that. You rewatched them all
in the 2 months leading up to part 7.
And then you rank them there. So why don't you run down your ranking again, and then maybe you want to tell us where would you put number 8?
My number 1 is still the original, I think.
Which I think is actually a slightly contrarian or controversial.
I get a little bit. I think so. I think there's a lot of people who pick one of either the Macquarie or Brad Bird ones as their favorite now, I think. Yeah. And actually, and even at the time, people forget, like, people really liked the third one.
Yep.
Even though it's kind of fallen in a lot of people's estimations.
The brother who's not here, when it came out, was a huge fan of Mission Impossible 3.
My one thing, just to say, as I'm ranking these, they're all good.
Yes, and that,
even number 3, I like it. It's
Yes.
just my least favorite. That's
the thing. Like I was like, yes, before the ranking, I have to say, like I give all Mission Impossible movies like a 7 or higher. Like I think they're all good movies.
Yeah.
And I would rewatch any of them if you're like, let's just throw it on.
Exactly. My ranking would be Fallout, Rogue Nation, 2 and 3, or if you want to do 3, swap that order. It's kind of personal preference.
Is it Henry Cavill who?
It definitely is Henry Cavill that tips it for me, and I just think like some of the stunt stuff and all that's great. I think then I'd put Ghost Protocol, which I think did a great job of sort of rejigging the series, and the Burj Khalifa thing still holds up really well. And then I actually really like Mission Impossible 2, even though it may not be a real, some people in their mind doesn't really fit into them. I just like John Woo so much, and I like the idea of like a John Woo, Tom Cruise, film in that way. And I actually think it works well because it is just John Woo doing Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious. With Tandy Newton in the Ingrid Bergman role.
That is where Miss Hall comes in.
Excuse me?
Miss Hall and Ambrose had a relationship which he took very seriously. She walked away and he's been wanting her back ever since. We believe she's our surest and quickest way of locating him.
And then what?
Well, make sure she continues to see him, gets him to confide in her, and report to you.
Then I would put number 6, Dead Reckoning Part 1, which I liked, but I thought the way that it was framed so clearly as Part 1 meant it lacked resolution, didn't stand as well, and I was like, maybe I'll reevaluate it on its after the second one. And then I do put Part 3 the lowest. Again, not because it's bad, but for my mind, it doesn't have some of the stuff that I really like the most about it, and I do think that trying to introduce a wife for Ethan is the biggest misstep.
I understand why someone was like, hey, what if Ethan Hunt had a wife? And JJ's love of his mystery box. So if we take that movie, it has two initial puzzles. It has the pre-credits puzzle where, okay, Ethan is going to be tortured by the villain, and there's a woman there, And it seems like he's going to die, or someone's going to die. And then right after that, we get Ethan Hunt with a woman. I remember watching that movie in theaters for the first time and being extremely puzzled by both those scenes. I really think that like JJ's love of like the initial puzzle for the audience, he doesn't understand the repercussions sometimes.
Exactly.
Because then the series has always been struggling to deal with Ethan's wife ever since.
Yeah, and weirdly enough, though, me putting Fallout number 2, it is the one that has to deal with that, right?
And does it in actually a pretty good way.
Yeah. So where would I slot
where would you put
Final Reckoning? Right now, I like it better than the first one. Dead Reckoning Part 1.
Okay. Yeah.
Push comes to shove, I'd probably put it around the same level as Ghost Protocol, probably.
Okay, so maybe above, maybe below Ghost.
Part 2.
So middle of the pack.
Yeah.
Okay, here's my ranking. Upon rewatch, I think Mission Impossible 5, Rogue Nation is my favorite. And I just think that the movie operates so slick and well. It has great action sequences. There are other movies that potentially have better, but I think the total package just like works super well, and it's a movie I could rewatch instantly. Next, I would probably put Ghost Protocol. When I actually saw it way back when it came out, I don't know if I actually saw it in theaters. Whenever it is that I first saw it, I didn't think hugely of it. I thought it was like, oh, those are great action sequences. I didn't necessarily like love the story or anything. But going back, I just think like the Burj Khalifa sequence, which is so big, and like not only just him climbing on the outside of it, but then it leads into the sandstorm, and the fact that it's like we're trying to operate this sort of duplicitous operation where we have to pretend to be people. Like it's a great mini movie within a movie, and it's the soft reboot that reinvents the series, and for the better in my view, and really starts to find like what makes these movies great. Even though I think the first 3 have definitely stuff I like in them. So 5, 4, then I'll say Fallout,
which in some ways is Rogue Nation Part 2.
So here's my sort of theory, and this will explain what follows in my ranking. I think that the Mission Impossible movies, going all the way back to the very first one, are literally tentpole construction. And what I mean by that is that around the center of the movie is actually the pinnacle of the action sequences. And that's usually some form of heist where you have to retrieve something. Whether you're stealing as like a thief, but we're just saying you have to retrieve something. And then the final action sequence is usually some sort of chase or stopping the villain from implementing whatever their plan is. And that's one of the key formulas in the series. And you can think back, number 2, which people say is not a Mission Impossible movie.
What is that?
It has that formula. They steal. That's where they steal.
In Downtown Sydney when he goes into the...
And he has to jump down on
the
a
shaft.
bungee cord and go through the shaft, and then it has the big action scenes and chases at the end. And then the Burj Khalifa is the tentpole of tentpoles because literally having the giant building in the center. But then I also think if we look at the overall series, this structure is like, I think the middle films are actually the strongest. So I think 4, 5, and 6, if I could just take kind of that sort of set trilogy, they're my favorite. Partly because Ilse Faust is around for 2 of them. Partly because I think the team dynamics work the best and they have the best action sequences. But I think there's something about this like sort of tentpole structure that really defines the series. So then next, after Fallout, I'm gonna right now I can't separate Part 1 and Part 2 or Dead Reckoning and Final Reckoning. I probably like Final Reckoning better. I quite like Dead Reckoning. I really like their engagement with the AI stuff. But for me, they're sort of the middle films in the series. They're too long. They're imperfect in certain ways. But I really like them. And then I would say I'd probably rank Mission Impossible 1 right after those. It's hard to say. I'm essentially saying I like these most recent ones better because of the stunts. But Mission Impossible 1 does have like a special place for me. I do love it's scaled back Euro thriller atmosphere. It's the kind of movie where it's just like constant reveal, someone betraying someone. I love movies where people are talking to people in rooms and you're unsure of who this person is and what we have to get from them. So it's great for intrigue. And then I'm going to say, like, upon rewatch, originally I probably would have said 2 is the worst because it's the least Mission Impossible. But upon rewatch in the past, like, week, I would say I actually like 2 better than 3.
Yeah. It's just more entertaining.
2's like, I enjoy it so much. It's so ridiculous. But it's just like, I'm going to come back and get you. And then he, like, jumps off the building with his 2 guns up in the air and then the parachute. It's just the John Woo-ness of it is a lot of fun. I love the fact that it's like Bellerophon, Chimera. Mission Impossible 3. I think it's still a good movie. But my biggest thing was that, and I sort of mentioned it earlier, was just that it feels very much 2006, what people were like, oh, wow, this is exciting filmmaking. And almost 2 decades later, that doesn't look like that exciting filmmaking. So no. I'm sorry, but we're at a stage where, like, it's a shaky camera. Not exciting.
Also, Bourne did it better.
Yes. Well, so it's just like we're going to add intensity to the scene by having a shaky cam. And then, again, the trick of, like, none of the other movies replay the sequence like that, where it's like we're going to show you a scene and we'll show you it again later. And by this stage in filmmaking, it's been done so many times. I understand at that point in time that people were like, oh, wow. And like they played that in the trailers and it was a really sort of kind of daring thing, but it just doesn't work that well anymore. But overall, it's still a good movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Watch it
I'm compelled by your idea of the structure of each film, having the middle heist and then the end thing. Because like Final Reckoning has the descent into the Sevastopol as the retrieval thing, and then you have the end thing. And the very first film, you got the Langley heist, and then the final chase,
which is the one
the
everyone references ever since.
Yep, and then the Channel scene at the end.
Yeah, well, because in 3, like it's a little bit later, but the whole getting the rabbit's foot, right? Is that what it's called? The rabbit's foot doesn't have. That's not the climax at the end of the movie. It's earlier in the movie. So 4, 5, we're going to dive in and we're going to repeat the Langley heist by, again, getting it from a secure server. And then 6, the difference for 6 is their heist is a person. It's not like a thing, but they do in every one of the movies.
It's true. It's interesting. That's a compelling reading of the structure of these films, and I think that gives them something to sort of hang on.
Whether they're going to do another one, that they wanted to keep it open that Ethan Hunt is always out there, and he will always do the impossible mission.
Excuse me, Mr. Hunt. Would you like to watch a movie?
No, thank you.
Would you consider the cinema of the Caribbean? Aruba, perhaps.
Well, thank you for listening. Maybe this inspires you to go back and review the catalog as well. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.